Welcome back, everyone, to Random's Thoughts. We're jumping into another Mythgard Melee. Now, this time, we're going to review a game in which I was playing Blue Orange Rainbow against another strong player piloting Turn of Seasons Green Red. Now, in both cases, these are kind of, I guess, more unique builds at this stage. The Blue Orange list that I'm playing is, I guess you could define it as an oldie but a goodie. It was from several patches ago, and I just kind of picked it up because recently Dryas has been popularizing a different iteration of Blue Orange Rainbow, and I just kind of wanted to get back to my roots with it and see how I felt about it. Now, this Green Red tree list is sporting some interesting things, but also kind of simultaneously falls into the expected category. As you can see in the opening hand, there's a Gorgonelli, and I think we all know what that means. A specific red turn 8 spell that is going to try and take the game over. Going into this match, I wasn't really clear exactly who's favored, who's not in this matchup. Now, I believe our opponent has an advantage going second. We do have the opportunity to potentially just All-Father's Horn and toot them to death. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to happen. The red deck can present, obviously, a number, or red base deck can present a number of threats out of hand, as well as all of the enormous green bombs that could potentially happen. So let's jump into it and see how it goes. So here we are, as we saw before, with the opening hands. Initially, we have somewhat of a relatively slow hand. We are on the play, so it's not the end of the world. We have some blue to burn so that we can set up a Conquest on 3, a Knoll of Conquest. We also have a turn 2 play, although, as you can see, I was going in expecting this thing is not going to live very long. I actually wanted to preserve the Valhalla at the initial outset because I figured that we could try and grind our opponent out, even though they do have somewhat of a better late game. We do start off with All-Father's Horn, so having the Valhalla generate a free minion would allow us to try and set up that board state where, okay, yeah, you slammed Stag, you slammed Finale, you slammed Helicarrier because of Finale or otherwise. Okay, well, I just need to clear one or two things, get through for a little bit of damage, and then the game is over because I All-Father Horns you to death. That was at least the initial thought. Our opponent actually has somewhat of a clunky hand themselves, but does have A, answers to our early game threats, B, things to burn, and C, clean answers to the Knoll, because this is effectively direct removal. The Knoll can present a number of problems for a variety of decks because it's a somewhat chunky minion, having 3 health. It's a significant threat in that if you don't contest it, it represents 3 from itself and then 2 from the trigger. And that's a decent amount. Plus, it represents repeated damage, even if you are able to remove the immediate token, because then I can just slam something later. So let's see how it goes. The Frankie Sidecar ended up getting burned because I anticipated that we A, are going to have it as a good top deck. B, I didn't want to, as I said, get rid of Valhalla, and we clearly don't want to get rid of Knoll. We need to burn blue to try and set up for things, and we didn't have orange to burn for the Trickster. So our opponent plays the tree and passes, kind of expected. I needed the blue, or excuse me, the orange for the Trickster. Even though I knew it was likely to die, this forces our opponent to do things as opposed to just sit back and foresight and set up their draws. Us passing on 2 doesn't seem very valuable either. And I was operating under the assumption that we're going to stick to Valhalla at some point. This is an okay minion to reanimate. So we forged the Pyre in favor of the Knoll because, well, we're going to get it. Now, one thing I want to call out here is we position this here for a variety of reasons. One, our opponent, well, they have led astray, but if they did not, they would have to play directly here. And at this early in the game, we're likely trading with whatever it is when it tries to run in. We obviously can't just punch this minion. I also played it here because by the time that the Knoll is able to attack, we will then be able to one-shot the tree because they're going to be going into winter. If they choose to do something other than oppose it, it's going to deal damage and then eat their tree. So it kind of demands our opponent plays in a specific way. So we'll continue from here. Plus, we want the enchantment in the middle so that we can set up and get a better discount on things that the higher end enchantments, things we really want to get into play. Unfortunately, our opponent has a led astray, so big old womp womp there. So we burn the Thunderclap. I don't think it's very effective in this matchup outside of Severing Ritual, which is a good reason to keep it. But instead, we're going to slam Kara in the end lane. I think the burning the Thunderclap is both a mistake and not a mistake. Here's the reason. We just saw our opponent burn 7-Ring Ritual. Now, in this matchup, any Thunderclap matchup, any yellow matchup, 7-Ring Ritual immediately decreases in value by a lot. Your opponent likely is going to say, you're red, you probably have 7-Ring Ritual. I'm going to keep my board sweeper. And by burning the Thunderclap, we signal to our opponent, who is a very good player, that I probably have another one. So otherwise, why would I do that? That's crazy, because I'll get blown out by 7-Ring. The bad play is, if they call our bluff, we could be in a lot of trouble. We do have the plateau to try and fight, just man fight things, and then we can just play more bodies. However, that's only going to control these 4 lanes. Well, really these 5. There are other lanes that could be open that could end up being problematic, that they're still going to preserve bodies for, or with the 7-Ring Ritual, preserve the bodies from the 7-Ring Ritual, which could present an issue. But we have a Kara, they have an empty board, they need to play things to contest it, and simultaneously, Kara's going to grow. So I felt that was worth it. As I said, there's an argument to maybe do Bragi instead, or burn the Thieves' Bazaar, so that we still hold on to this. I wanted the extra blue so we could hypothetically get, well, not hypothetically, but I wanted specifically to get to 4 blue gems as quickly as possible in preparation for the Horn turn, but we didn't necessarily need to do it as quickly as possible. That was just what I was thinking. We could have held off for a little bit. So let's continue from here. So in this case, we know that Kara's not long for this world, because while we can crash through this enemy, Kara's just going to take damage in the process. So instead, we'll just punch. We got to clear it out. And because we were not required to accelerate this out, and we didn't have anything to play on it anyway, even if we did accelerate it out, we wouldn't have had enough mana to play Bragi in the same turn. We're just going to set it up so that the tokens will end up on the knoll and get us potentially free damage. Unfortunately, because of the earlier plays, the tree has still been gaining life. So our green-red opponent is now at 28. That's a lot. Even for Horn, that's a lot. So we could run into some issues here. So we'll continue on. Obviously, the ignition comes down. We kind of expected that our opponent was going to have that or Crucible Flare, something. And then Oak. So our opponent now has board advantage to some extent, but we can quickly bring it back. Bragi comes down, which, depending on our early play, might not have been there. But clearly, we're in good shape with this. Now, we're sending back the knoll, and that may or may not be correct. And by may or may not, I did that strictly so that I could play the Pyre this turn. There really isn't anything other than Magmatar that could get played that could come out of green-red that's going to deal with these. You could play multiple burn cards. You could do a couple other different things that would potentially mess with all of this. But this frees up damage. Again, this is going to deal 2 if they don't play something specifically here. We clearly don't want to get rid of the Magnus, even though we saw the 7-Ring Ritual get burned. It's going to help us. Our opponent's only in spring, so we're not going to be able to blow them out with winter, but we can, if this dies, give something fragile, such as the Oak, remove it, etc. Here's the main thing, though. All of that put aside. I was planning on holding the Valhalla, and at this stage, we still haven't played it. My initial plan, when I opened had my opening hand, I was planning on playing it on 4, and we had a naked board for the most part to, well, not for the most part. It wasn't entirely empty. There was a tree. We'll put that out there. But we elected to play Kara and advance a threat instead, which I think ultimately was correct. But at this stage, are we going to play the Valhalla? It felt like it was too strong not to hold on to it, but there's an argument to burn it instead of the Thunderclap. We didn't have Bragi at that stage, or excuse me, I keep calling Magnus Bragi, and I've done this so many times. We didn't have the Magnus. Well, we had the Magnus, so it's a little bit of duplication here, but it is also face damage. Point being is I don't know if the Valhalla is worth it, but we'll continue on. Just wanted to call that out. So we do get a free draw off the stairway, or with the stairway, with the rainbow for stairway. Man, I just couldn't get that one right. We will be able to cleanly clear the tree, assuming that the Drang doesn't get removed. Our opponent's able to draw some cards, kill a token. Okay. This is a little awkward. This is uncomfortable because we can't get rid of that and free up the Bragi to punch in the way that we really want to. But since we have the opportunity, we're playing the Magnus to eliminate the Oak before our opponent can gain any life out of it. Plus, the damage allows us to clear that. We don't have to infuse. What we possibly should have done was burn, and that's actually something that's going to come up later on. If we're short a mana on a few later turns, where if we had burned, we might have been okay. Now, again, I was specifically trying desperately to hold on to the Valhalla, which at this point, we probably should have ditched it. That would have allowed us to push one more damage with Bragi. Does that matter? Maybe. Probably not. What we also could have done instead, and this would have really been better, is if we buffed the token here, we could kill the tree and then run in and trade with the Drang. Now that, I did consider that for a few moments, but here's the drawbacks of that. One, we miss out on giving something fragile. We burned our Thunderclap. We already played Magnus. That maybe wasn't, it's really not going to matter all that much because we're not getting the out-of-combat damage. But it could matter because we could trade up into something. The bigger thing is that we presented a token on here which is still a threat, so they have to position here. However, we only had Bragi and only had the token, so I felt that it wasn't going to be that big of a deal because you can, this late in the game, you could play just about anything and just stop the token and the Bragi. So I didn't think it was ultimately that big of a problem, but those are alternative plays that we could have made. So our opponent here plays a White Tower Warden, which is a problem for us. It leads to somewhat of an awkward turn because of this Gallows Boy that follows up. We want to frenzy something to push damage, and we do draw a Danger Zone, a one of in this list, that could push a ton of damage. I just didn't quite map all of this out properly, and I think there were certainly more optimal plays to be made. So we want to clear this out. It frees up the, and that was another reason not to have the token here, is making more tokens, but okay, we traded in. It's not that big a deal. I wanted to get the sidecar out. We wanted to activate the frenzy. If we had instead replaced the Knoll, so what we could have done here is play the Knoll, or excuse me, play the Danger Zone over the Knoll. It costs 3, so therefore we're getting a complete refund on it. We can still infuse plus play the sidecar. Then we're slamming, instead of 1, 2, 3, and then 6 for a total of 9, we're hitting for 14 because of another 6 damage. That threatens our opponent significantly more than what we already have. Plus, the Danger Zone's already on the board. We're going to have to trade here. I was debating at certain points playing the Giant Stairway over things. But again, we're 1 mana short. We're coming up on 1 mana short of doing a few different cool things. This Valhalla, you know, at this stage in the game, we're going to turn 8. If they finale'd here, we could have been in trouble. If we try to play the Valhalla and play the long game, then we're giving our opponent more turns to find a finale. I think we need to close out the game much more quickly than we tried to do. So we'll continue from here. We do present a ton of damage here, don't get me wrong. We push a fair amount. But think about if we had done another 4. Or excuse me, another 6. I think I miscounted earlier, so it would have been 9 and 6 is 15, not 14. I misstated. So one of the interesting things about this is because we didn't Stairway, that Extract Life is exceptionally mediocre. Like, that is hilariously mediocre because it gains 2 life back. It matters, don't get me wrong. Our opponent had to remove the sidecar, but that was not thrilling. So we elect to infuse here to cleanly remove, due to Winter, the Gorgonelli. We have to trade stuff out. We could have played a Stairway and possibly done something cool there, such as keep the token. But here's where the Valhalla comes out. We create more tokens. We're going to have a humongous board state next turn, so it's going to be very difficult for our opponent to contest us without specifically a Finale or a Helicarrier, which I felt if they had it, they probably would have played it last turn. Possibly not in order to dodge the sidecar being live, but I think they probably would have gone for it. So our opponent's at 16, which is well within horn range, or should have been, in which case they is. So we have 8 mana. We can play the Stairway. We can play the Danger Zone. And now we crash for a billion. We probably could have, if we had not misplayed. And ultimately, were these humongous misplays? I think so. They seem innocuous over those several turns. However, they add up, and it gave our opponent more draw steps. As you see, we finished the game on turn 9. They had 2 turns where they could have played 7-Ring Ritual, they could have played Finale, they could have hardcast a Helicarrier. Any of those would have made our lives way, way, way more difficult. I think having to find an earlier horn is very important. Now, could we have outvalued them with the Valhalla? Possibly, depending on which of those they had. We had both Guardian Plateau. Well, that's a Sand Guardian. I was trying to click on this one, clicked on the wrong one. We have a Guardian Plateau and we have a Valhalla, but I really think that we lucked out in this game that our opponent did not have those other cards, and sometimes that's how it works out. However, they drew and saw enough cards that it seems like this was just variance in our favor. So how does this matchup normally play out? I think the Rainbow deck does need to be the aggro deck in this matchup. I think the Red-Green deck has the better late game. I think Red-Green has the tools to try and beat it. However, as to who's favored, I'm not really clear. I would lean towards the Tree deck, but at the same time, it's hard to beat Allfather's Horn Toots. Sometimes it just goes, oops, I win. So I'm going to have to play more games with this and see. I've been doing fairly well with the Rainbow deck on ladder at the moment, but the jury's still out for a lot of this, at least for me. So that'll do it for this time. As always, everybody, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and Black Lives Matter.